Hi everyone, it's Andy Blow from Precision Hydration. I'm here to talk about knowing your numbers when it comes to carbohydrate fueling and carbohydrate intake for training and racing. It's the Physical Performance Show, and I'm delighted to be here for another shot with Brad.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to episode 290 of the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Polar's world-leading GPS watches and heart rate monitors, Pogo Physio's online telehealth consultations, and the Physical Performance Show's very own Learnings membership, where you can support the production of the show over at Patreon. I'm Brad Beer, sports physiotherapist and exercise scientist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week, we'll bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration designed to help you perform at your physical best. And of course, we do this across a range of our different episodes: interest editions, coaches' corners, featured performers, catch-up episodes, and our popular expert editions. And off the back of last week's featured performer episode featuring 2016 Rio Olympic Games cyclist in both the road race and mountain bike events, Scott Bowden, this week you're in for an insightful expert edition featuring return guest of the Physical Performance Show all the way from back on episode 213, and that is Andy Blow, who almost 1 year ago to the date of this episode release shared around hydration science. And today, the topic of exploration is knowing your carbohydrate fueling numbers. Now, when it comes to hard training, long training, and our endurance racing events, it is critical that we have a plan for our carbohydrate fueling. It's an area, as you'll hear Andy Blow share around today, that causes a lot of confusion and angst amongst endurance athletes. Personally, I've been through that. I've been 30 years around the sports of triathlon and distance running, and I'm still very much a student of understanding my fueling needs. Fortunately, the team at Precision Hydration and some other great minds have helped me in recent times on my journey, and I'm definitely somewhere along the learning continuum now. But the aim of this expert edition is to accelerate some learnings around how we best know and determine our carbohydrate fueling goals and needs. You'll hear Andy Blow, co-founder of Precision Hydration and former elite professional long course triathlete himself, share today around what he terms the three levers of fueling and why it's so important that we replace the right amount of water, electrolytes, and get enough carbohydrate in to meet our energy demands and fuel best performance and optimize training and recovery. Andy discusses how to choose which energy fueling product is right for you, be that energy drinks, energy gels, energy bars, or energy chews. And importantly, Andy will help you determine your carbohydrate intake needs. Get ready with your pen and paper. There's plenty of learnings in this expert edition featuring Andy Blow. Let's jump right in. Andy Blow, welcome back to the Physical Performance Show.
Hi Brad, good to be back. Thank you for the invite.
It has been nearly a year since you last appeared around all things hydration science, which was a very popular expert edition. And today we are discussing fueling for the endurance athlete, in particular, how to select your carbohydrate intake needs around numbers with a systematic approach. So it's been a busy time as always for the Precision Hydration team by the looks.
Yeah, it certainly has. Like you say, I can't believe it was 12 months ago when you and I were chatting. We must have still been we were in lockdown then. And I know you guys have been in and out of that recently still, but it was that lockdown period and talking to a lot of athletes on video calls that really pushed us into starting to look at this fueling element in more detail. We've been talking about it for years, but we were having these one-to-one athlete consultations around hydration, and when we look back at the recordings of them, at least 90% of them, athletes wanted to talk to us about fueling as well, which kind of makes sense. It's obvious, really, the two go hand in hand. So that was the push that we needed to start really developing some tools and some products in that area. And here we are now, 12 months later, and we've got them ready and out there.
And I myself have been enjoying the Precision Fuel range with the 30-gram carbohydrate gels. It's a nice neutral taste. That's just such a nice little touch to stop that fatigue that we get with repetitive sweet flavors. So that's, for me, a personal nice anecdote from the gels. But if we look into the science of fueling, I've heard you reference the 3 levers for endurance sports in terms of fueling and meeting needs, meeting the demands. Can you just take us through these 3 levers? What are they and why do they matter?
Yeah, that sort of concept of the 3 levers came out gradually. It evolved out of loads of conversations with athletes and coaches who quite rightly were trying to get their heads around the complexities of sports fueling and nutrition. And whilst we're not trying to pretend that sports nutrition as a whole is not a complex subject, it's an extremely complex subject. If the way it's presented to athletes often leads to more confusion than knowledge. And so gradually over time, we sort of started to look at what's the easiest way, what's the most basic way we can present the most fundamental concepts of fueling and hydration to athletes. And what we came up with was this idea that actually when you're doing an endurance event, the principal costs that the body bears in terms of nutrients is you lose water and electrolytes through sweat, and you burn carbohydrate calories. And if you can replace roughly the right amount of water, roughly the right amount of electrolyte, and get enough carbohydrate in to meet your energy demands, then they really are, that is the backbone of a good fueling and nutrition strategy. And they're not the only things you ever need to consider, that's for sure. But if you get those things right, you enable the body to maintain homeostasis more easily, which is the goal of what you're trying to do. And you will probably have a good race. And in conversations with athletes, what we realized is that there is a lot of confusion or lack of understanding or appreciation for what the parameters are around each one of those numbers. And obviously we've been addressing the fueling, the fluid and electrolyte issue for a number of years. But then the next step was, okay, well, how do we pair that? And what does the science say? And what does our personal experience as athletes and coaches say about the fueling needs? And then what do we need to do to educate people on that? So that's how we packaged it, if you like, as like this 3 levers idea. And so increasingly we've been going out to groups, talking to people like yourself through the medium of podcasts to talk about this idea that what athletes need to do is learn what their 3 numbers are. How much fluid do they need in different conditions? How much sodium do they need? How much carbohydrate do they need? And that's the kind of mission that we're on now.
How much fluid? How much sodium? How much carbohydrate?
Exactly, yeah.
In essence, simple concepts to grasp. But as you say, it's not an uncomplex science, but frameworks help all of us. And that is easy for anyone to, pardon the pun, digest. How much fluid, how much sodium, how much carbohydrate.
Yeah. And one of the ways we've been addressing that is we've started working with all of the sort of elite athletes that we support, and starting to, before a race and after a race, we sit down with them a few days before and we ask them what their plan is. What do they intend to eat and drink throughout the race? And we'll then break that down from a fluid, salt and sodium and carb point of view. And then we ask them what they're going to do after the race. We get an immediate debrief with them. What did they actually eat and drink? And we try and break those numbers down as well. So we can compare the plan with the actual, and we compare both of those with what sort of science and good practice says is right. And we can also factor in the weather conditions, because obviously if it's hotter and more humid, they're likely to need to drink more and take more electrolytes. If it's cold, maybe they'll take a little bit. Well, they will take a little bit less. But what will the carbohydrate needs be? And how do they, even if we can get the information, how do they stagger those out of the race? And whilst that is very sort of labor intensive exercise, it's been fascinating. And we're starting to build up a really good database of numbers with people. That's been a huge part of the process. And what we're looking to do then is take that concept and we're building tools around it to help people then figure out their own individual carbohydrate, fueling and electrolyte needs.
Yeah, that's very clever, laborious, but clever and disciplined approach, isn't it? And some of Precision Hydration's athletes have featured as featured performers on this show in the past. Sam Appleton, long course triathlete, and Dougal Allen, multi-sport athlete from New Zealand. And I think I may have read at some point, might have been Sam Appleton's post-Daytona race, his fueling. And as a average day athlete, common day athlete, I find that fantastic to get a look at how the pros have done it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what we're aiming to do, is sort of democratize that information, because it's not very widely accessible. It's not very widely known, because I think for two reasons. One, sometimes people can be a little bit guarded about the information they want to release. And a lot of the athletes that we work with have been very generous in sort of signing up to the idea that we will put this information more in the public domain, because my argument to that has always been that we're not giving away secrets here. It's all very well knowing what these people do. It doesn't mean that you should copy it or that it'll work for you. It's just it's a useful insight. It helps to, like you said, it helps to build that framework. What are the faster elite performers doing? And there's always that question that needs addressing. Are they doing really well because of their fueling plan and their hydration plan, or despite their fueling and hydration plan? Are they able to compensate for not doing it quite right because they're so fit and they're so gifted at what they do? But those two guys that you've highlighted, like Sam and Dougal in particular, have been superb to work with, because they've really sort of taken the process very seriously. They've been very methodical in what they're recording, and each race now we're able to build up a little bit more of a picture for them. What we're looking at, for instance, we just as we're talking now, it's a few days after Boulder 70.3, where Sam Appleton was just second place, and literally this morning landed on my desk his post-race numbers for the carbs that he had and the fluids and the salts. And we're going to then sit down with him later this week, and we'll talk that through in relation to how's that going to affect the plan for the Collins Cup, which is coming up in August, and then the 70.3 Worlds, because we'll start to have a really idea of how closely matched the course is, how closely matched the weather is going to be, the likely tactics and all those sort of things. These days, with all the data you can record, all the sports science support that people have, there's a lot of, this isn't a particularly sexy area. This is just like writing down numbers and asking athletes how many gels they ate and that sort of thing. But what we're finding is that if you get this right, this is hugely impactful for performance. I would argue not that I'm against things like heart rate variability or these sort of things, but I see all these people with Whoop bands and this sort of stuff who are measuring all these things, but they can't tell me how many gels they had on the bike during an Ironman. And you sort of think that's a huge gap, that's a void that needs filling, really.
I had my first Ironman experience this year in Cairns, and I spectacularly failed in the fueling department with my carbohydrate sources not changing actually last minute from what I'd done in training. So you would think after 30 years being around endurance sports, I would have not made that fatal flaw. But it brings up a point before we look at some of these specifics and strategies, Andy, that I think many athletes look at the pros and just think that they have it dialed in, that they're all sorted. And but the realities can often be quite different. I saw Molly Siddell, the bronze medalist from our Tokyo 2020 or 2021 marathon, on the weekend, and there was, Molly had posted out that she was looking up a night or two before about her fueling and hydration needs before the hot conditions in Tokyo. So I thought that was refreshing for many people. People need help with this. It's not tricky, but it's also not easy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there are a number of athletes who have this totally dialed. They know exactly what they're doing. They're very methodical. They've got great plans and they execute them. But they are definitely the minority. The majority of athletes, this is still, even at the highest level for a lot of people, this is still a bit of a mystery. And that can be because sometimes you can do pretty much exactly the same thing on two different occasions and get two slightly different results because of all the other complex variables that are involved. We all know your body, you never go into the same to two different races with your body in exactly the same state. The weather conditions are never identical, and you've got to have this very persistent mindset that you're going to just look for trends and there are definitely things you can do wrong, but there's probably multiple things you can do right. And also, as I alluded to before, there are definitely times when I've seen elite athletes do it incredibly well, when on paper, their fueling has been atrocious. And at other times they fuel really well, but they have bad races. But that doesn't necessarily mean that on that day, that was the biggest influencing factor. I think when you're very fit, you have capacity to get away with a little bit more. You have a bit more leeway. all of that complexity and the frustration that comes with doing the same things and getting different results and stuff. What I'm learning is that needs to be steamrolled over with a long-term view, which is, look, I'm going to keep learning. Every time I do a race, I'm going to, in a hard training session, I'm going to record what I eat and drink. I'm going to note it down. And it's another brick in the wall in terms of learning how to build my strategy for the long term. And I think when you look at that, like we've talked about him already, but one of the best examples of that is Dougal Allen, because Dougal he's one of those guys who I'd put it in the camp where he basically nails it most times now. But when you read his early experiences, he used to screw it up all the time. And it took him years of just persistently building. And we talk in business about this idea. Our business is 10 years old now. And Sean, one of the guys who is more experienced, who works in our business in North America, he always says you see all these success. He talks about things which he calls the 10-year overnight success story, which is where you kind of, everyone assumes when something comes to the foreground, all of a sudden overnight, that it's just been quick and easy and it's just happened. But usually you look back and there's 10 years of hard graft in the build up to that. And I think if you ask Dougal, it would probably be something like that, 10 years worth of, incrementally building on experience. And so that he's now in the tail end of his career, but this is an area now where he's a true expert for himself.
I think that's one, encouraging to hear that you can get there, but also two, encouraging that this is a process of learning and relearning. So I think people may at times feel a little bit embarrassed that they've been around for a while and still need help with this, but I'd suggest ask for help. I've got an exercise science degree and I've been around the sport. I'm a practicing physio. This is not my strength. I need help in this area. So your team have been terrific on the hydration and electrolyte side, and now you're helping me with the fueling side as well. So the big question then, we know that carbohydrate intake is important. How do we learn our numbers?
I think what it comes down to is like we say with hydration, the fundamental learning mechanism is trial and error. But what you can learn from the science and from experience and from the kind of tools we're building, rather than having the ballpark for trial and error really wide, you can narrow down to a good starting point. And we know what that tends to be based with carbohydrate intake on two major variables, which are the length of the activity that you're doing and the intensity of the activity that you're doing. Basically, with shorter and or less intense events, the amount of carbohydrate you're going to need, because that's the fuel to power it, is going to be lower. And as the intensity goes up and as the distances and durations get longer, the amount of carbohydrate that you're going to need to support that work increases. And what it's all about is starting to figure out, okay, at the lower end, at what point does fueling need to begin? Does it need to kick in, and at what level? And then basically, how far do I need to go with that fueling as I go longer and harder races and get fitter? And how far can I go potentially in order to push the ceiling of performance up? The good thing about this is, unlike in the hydration science world, whilst it's not exactly uncontentious, there's a lot more agreement in sports science and nutrition around fueling numbers. And they sort of start at the lower end with around about 30 grams of carb per hour for activities that when you start to go beyond 60 to 90 minutes, then 30 grams of carbohydrate an hour is usually very tolerable by most people, is proven to support better performance, because at that point you're starting to burn through and get low on your endogenous glycogen stores. So the stored carbohydrate in your muscles and your liver is starting to get depleted. If you can supplement some of that, then you can sustain a higher level of performance. Once you start to go beyond 2 to 3 hours, you're going to benefit from more. And the standard recommendation, the starting point for most people's experimentation there is 60 grams an hour. So at that point, you really are going to rinse through your glycogen stores. So you're better off fueling a bit earlier, a bit more aggressively, and topping up further. And then what's been interesting in the last 10, 12 years is that this kind of 60 grams was always seen as a lot of carbohydrate. In the literature, at least, it was seen as a lot of carbohydrate to take an hour. Then people started studying athletes in the wild, and we're seeing guys and girls eating 80, 90, 100 grams of carbohydrate an hour. And so science kind of had to do a bit of catching up, reworking its thinking. And now what we're seeing is lots of anecdotal reports and some case studies of people eating 120. I've even seen 140 grams of carbohydrate an hour in some circumstances for very fit athletes doing very long, very hard events. And so that at least gives us that kind of 30 to, let's say, 120 grams of carb an hour, gives us a really good range for where to start experimentation based on your past experience and the sort of the duration and intensity of your event.
So 30 grams or 60 grams is a base sort of starting point, as you say, Andy, dependent on the intensity of the event and also the duration. With higher intensities, I've read greater than 60% of VO2, so those upper level efforts needing carbohydrate, and less than that, less so.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because when you're going, I mean, that's the thing about the carb discussion is often what gets glossed over is, this isn't just about, you could go out for an easy 3 hour bike ride. And if you went easy enough, you're going to be burning majority fat, and you may not need to supplement with very much carbohydrate at all. I mean, you may choose to if you've got another training session later that day or the next day or whatever. But when we talk about these recommendation numbers, these are about optimum performance at a high output. So it doesn't mean every time you go out the door and do something for 90 minutes, you need to be slamming energy gels. I think that's definitely the wrong message to be putting across. This is about selected times when you're pushing your limits. So the harder training sessions, and obviously racing when you're really trying to empty the tanks.
Andy, I know that Precision Hydration has been a supplier for, I believe, several of the Tour de France teams.
We're an official partner for Team DSM. So they use our sweat testing technology and some of our products in the tour. And we also unofficially, because it's the way it works in pro sport, a lot of other teams have partners and sponsors, but a lot of individual riders or some teams will also use our products, even if they're drinking them out of different bottles.
Yeah, which one of the blogs that your team sent out was a great read about, I think it might have been DSM, some of their approaches. And we recently featured David Bailey, the performance manager for Bahrain Victorious professional UCI cycling team. And David mentioned that they've tried to simplify the approach for the athletes with a point system to make sure they try and fuel well, which I thought was, one, interesting, two, very smart, given that these are athletes that, you don't want to be burning calories, processing numbers in your head. So I thought that was simple. And I also like the approach of the new fuel range where it's just all in 30s. Most people can go 30, 60, 90.
Yeah, exactly. No, that was that. We were gobsmacked when we first came out with the products. We looked at the science and thought, well, if we're recommending, broadly speaking, if we're recommending increments of 30, 60, 90, 120 grams of carbohydrate, we started reading the packets of different sports nutrition products, and they've all got seemingly random amounts of carbs in them. Like a gel could be anything. We found one energy gel that was quite a high volume, which only had 17 grams of carbs in it. And we found another one which had 26 grams or 28 grams. And then, and it was the same with drinks and this sort. So in the end, what we said was, do you know what's a real performance advantage here? Is just putting 30 grams of carb in every unit of our products. And then people can just do that maths on the fly. It's just like, I need one of these an hour. I need two. I need three. I need four, whatever it is, you can mix and match. And as you say, that's been one of the fundamentals for one of the best bits of feedback we've had from a lot of athletes is that it just takes that not that it's a huge cognitive load, but it's just reassuringly easy to think, oh yeah, no, I've had 3 of those. I've had 90 grams, job done. Move on to thinking about something more important. It also makes that process, actually, when we work with athletes who are using our products predominantly, it makes that debrief process after an event really easy, because we can just say to Sam, how many gels do you have on the bike, Sam? Oh, I had 2 gels an hour. Okay, great. That's 60 grams. There's no kind of working out. There's no getting your calculator out.
Yeah, brilliant. And Andy, before we look at the different types of energy products are available and the confusion that exists amongst gels, solids, how to navigate that in terms of the fueling per hour, what role does body weight play on this? Bigger athletes, smaller athletes in terms of body mass, body weight? Yeah,
so there's a bit of confusion around this usually because people think that fueling is extremely related to body weight, and the literature suggests maybe a little bit otherwise, in that when a bigger athlete will undoubtedly burn more energy to move at the same speed because of the laws of physics. You have to, if you're on the bike and you weigh more than the guy next to you, you have to lay down more watts to go at the same speed, not taking aero into consideration. But at the same time, you've also got bigger muscle mass, probably with more endogenous stores of fuel. And actually, with the fueling that you take in while you're riding or running or whatever, there is the rate limiting factor appears to be more to do with absorption rate through the gut than your ability to burn energy. In the literature, it suggests that sort of around 90 grams, although, like I say, with these case studies, up to 120, 130, 40 is being seen, that around 90 grams is towards the upper ceiling for most people to absorb per hour. That's almost regardless of size. Now, having said all of that, when you take the extremes, when you take a very small athlete and a very, very big athlete, in my experience, the bigger athletes tend to want to and be able to eat more. It's the same as the calorific requirements they have in daily life. What we don't tend to see, though, is as much divergence as you would expect, as you maybe would expect with common sense. So you're not going to find that a really big guy is going to eat twice as much or benefit from eating twice as much as a really small person because of that ability of the gut to absorb the carbs. And there's even a theory that's been sort of proposed by some researchers that people who are smaller actually have a bit of an advantage if they can increase their carbohydrate intake, because obviously their total calorie burn is going to be slightly lower. But if their gut can handle more carbs, then they can replace a higher percentage of their lost energy. So it plays a role, but it's not as linear as you might think in terms of the relationship.
Because that seems to be quite common advice, that figure out your carbohydrate requirements based off a multiple of your body weight. Grams. Grams per kilo of body weight. And it's definitely seems to be, it would hold true with regards to, say, carbo loading before an event and that sort of thing, because obviously that's where you've got bigger muscle mass, so you've got effectively bigger fuel tanks to load up, and so those recommendations tend to be related to body weight, the same as for recovery as well. But the recommendations for in exercise tend to be just kind of more static amounts. And what I would say is, though, as we keep emphasizing, the whole trial and error thing is important, and definitely you will find to give you an example, in the DSM riders, I've had access to looking at some of the data from Grand Tours, and you will see riders who routinely eat 65, 70 grams of carbohydrate an hour, and you'll see others that routinely eat over 100 grams an hour. So there is a difference, not always related entirely to their body weight. It might be the work rate on a certain day, but there's always a bit of variance. I would go so far as to say that in some sports and in some situations, there seems to be, it's kind of it's basically an advantage if you're one of those people who can eat and consume and digest comfortably a little bit more. Because the limiting factor with taking on more carbohydrate really tends to be, does it make you feel bloated and sick and give you a bad stomach? You get GI issues, which most endurance athletes will have experienced at some point, and it's one of the worst places to be in any event. Your day's over at that point. Like what you just shared there, Andy, around the rate limiting factor is this absorption rate. It's all well and good to get it in, but can you then absorb it and, one, benefit from it, and two, not develop gastric distress as a result? Which, of course, we'd expect there to be high levels of variability amongst athletes, like you shared in the professional cycling ranks. So it comes back to this trial and error in training before the big races.
And I think a little bit of acceptance of the fact that the gut is a bit trainable as well. You can train the gut to an extent. If you're maxing out at 40 or 50 grams an hour, you may not be a 120 gram an hour person in the future, but I'm pretty confident that you could nudge it up a bit. And there's a lot of case studies out there demonstrating now that if you take a progressive approach to loading up with more carbohydrates in key training sessions within a period of weeks, a lot of the studies look at kind of 4 to 8 weeks of increasing carbohydrate dosing during the hardest training sessions, you can significantly uplift the amount of carbs you can tolerate. And I know that that's relatively common practice. We were working with some marathon runners for Tokyo who were going through a phase of that in the build-up, the last few weeks, and who were, genuinely reporting a real increase in their ability to tolerate more carbs just by, if you were taking 60 grams an hour in week 1, in your longest, hardest run, then you'd do 70 grams an hour in week 2, and then bump it up to 80 grams in week 3. And just all the time, like you do with any progressive training metric, you're just trying to turn the screw gradually. Because as we know, and as you'll know, if you stress the body a little bit, the body has got an amazing capacity to adapt to all sorts of things. And so it shouldn't be a huge surprise that it can adapt to, in subtle ways, to absorb a little bit more carbohydrate if you give it the opportunity to. I know that as an athlete, because I kind of came from short course and then stepped up to long course triathlon. And because in short course you can get away with relatively a small amount of fueling, my approach to long distance racing at first was very much to like fuel effectively very lightly, very inadequately in training, and then take a lot more on race day, because then I would feel the benefit. But actually, with hindsight, that's a ridiculous approach, because what you're basically doing is throwing a load of extra stuff at your body on a day when it's under stress and expecting it to deal with it. And that I would say is still a fairly common issue that I see with athletes.
You're listening to episode 290 of the Physical Performance Show, on this expert edition featuring Andy Blow, co-founder of Precision Hydration, sharing around all things knowing your carbohydrate fueling numbers. Now, as you know, the Physical Performance Show is here to help inspire you towards your physical best performance. And we couldn't be more excited to announce our new show sponsor, Polar. Polar are a sports technology company who build world-class GPS watches and heart rate monitors for people who take their health, fitness and sports performance seriously. They have an incredible heritage. Headquartered in Finland, they have been the global driving force behind scientific wearables for over 4 decades. They are pioneers in and the world leaders in heart rate measurement technology. If you are going the distance, Polar's products provide you with the best 24/7 monitoring, so you can create a fueling plan that is optimized for you alone. In the heat of the battle, you get all the reminders you need so you don't blow up when you should have been fueled up. You see, Polar's GPS sports watches and monitors enable you to get the precision view on how many calories you burn and the different fuel sources your body is using across a day. In seconds, you can add their FuelWise feature to any activity, which automatically calculates the amount of carbs you'll need and gives hydration and carb reminders throughout the session. This allows you to focus on the job at hand. And I caught up recently with long-term listener of the Physical Performance Show, Kel Walker from Sydney, who shared with me why it is that he loves his Vantage M2 Polar watch so much.
G'day guys, I'm Kel Walker. I'm a Polar athlete. I currently use the Polar Vantage M2 watch for my marathon training for the Gold Coast and Melbourne marathons. What I love most about the Polar Vantage M2 is the overnight recovery measurement that it does. It shows how well I've recovered from the strain caused by training and other demands of my day. It's simple to use. You just put it on and wear it to bed at night. In the morning, I can clearly see what my sleep was like. The ANS records how well my body calmed down during the early hours of the sleep. So very handy for planning my training. The other thing I like a lot about the Polar Vantage is actually Polar Flow, the way it allows me to create training workouts that I can easily follow on my watch as I go. It allows me to do a variety of different workouts, including tempo runs intertwined with speed sessions, so intervals. Very handy as you're trying to build speed into your marathon and kicks in the marathon. So absolutely love it. Doesn't have to be used for a marathon. A 1,500 metre middle distance runner can actually use the watch in the same way. The team at Polar Australia have been wonderful with helping me understand and how to use the watch and being very supportive.
Now, as a starting bonus, the team at Polar are offering up to 15% off selected products simply by using the code TPPS at checkout. Jump over to Polar.com. If you're in the market for a new GPS watch, you want a truly smart watch, one that, as you just heard, can even help monitor your fueling levels, then jump over and take advantage of this great offer. Support for today's show also comes from Pogo Physio's telehealth consultations. If you are an endurance athlete struggling with bone stress injuries, tendon-related concerns or joint-related concerns or injury, then rest assured our online 45-minute telehealth consultations can be an ideal vehicle to help get you back to your physical best. To schedule your 45-minute online telehealth consultation with myself or any of the Pogo Physio team, jump over to pogophysio.com.au/telehealth. For now, let's jump back with Andy Blow on this expert edition around all things knowing your carbohydrate fueling numbers. Andy, occasionally you do hear an athlete cite that they are trying to save money and not buy their products for training sessions, save them for the race. I used to do that in my early
100%.
years, where it'd be like, well, I'm just going to save my gels when I need them most in the race. But that is, as you say, it's understandable in certain occasions, but it's not wise. It's definitely not smart.
I have to tread carefully because I'm now, whether I like it or not, I'm becoming a gel salesman. Now I sell energy gels, but at the same time, I've been an athlete and I've been one of those guys that thought, no, I'm not going to buy a load of energy gels and use them in training. I'll just, use whatever I've got lying around in the kitchen, and then on race day, I'll use gels. Yeah. And I think what I would say to that is that I'm not even with my vested interest in that, my mission is not to get people to use energy gels every training session. But what it is to say is that on those in the build up to a race, you should be using as much as possible the exact nutrition plan and hydration plan that you're going to execute on the day in your biggest and hardest training sessions, because that allows you to do all your learning. And it's not an uncommon phrase, but like nothing new on race day. Like make sure you've done it all before. And so when you think about it as well, this people use this cliche a lot, but the amount of money that we spend on our sport quite often, when you think of what a pair of shoes costs, a pair of wheels cost, what your new tires cost for a race, buying an extra pack of energy gels to use in the last 6 weeks, in your key training session doesn't seem all of a sudden like an extravagant expenditure.
No one can argue with that, of course. Exactly. So, Andy, brilliant. What are the different types of energy fuel products available? I mean, there seems to be a lot of confusion around, do I use gels, chews, drinks? How do people navigate this? Obviously, there's a trial and error component still, but any advice? Yeah,
I would say if you start at the simple end, there's obviously energy drinks, carbohydrate-based drinks, and they've been around for years. They started with Gatorade in the 70s. They're typically about 6% carbohydrate solution. Some are a bit stronger. We've got now the hydrogel type drinks, which pack a lot more carbohydrate in. Liquid carbs, I think, work phenomenally well for short to medium distance events. So when you're doing, for example, an Olympic distance triathlon, a bottle of a half a litre, 750 millilitres of a 6% carbohydrate solution is a really good happy medium product, because you're going to get 30 to 45 grams of carbohydrate in that liquid. You're also going to get some liquid to replace what you're losing in your sweat. And often if it's a well-formulated drink, you'll have some sodium in there as well. So you'll get a bit of everything. And when you're racing for that duration, a couple of hours or a little bit over, the getting exact replacement on carbs, fluid, salts is a little bit less important than just getting some in. And carbohydrate fuel is probably, in all but the hottest events, carbohydrate fuel is going to be more of a limiter in Olympic distance than hydration. Where people sometimes go wrong with the carb drinks, though, I think, is they try to use them excessively in long distance races, and especially in the heat, when all of a sudden the priorities shift and hydration, electrolyte supplementation from your bottles becomes a lot more important, and you may end up overdoing the carbs if you're having a syrupy carb. We've all had that feeling probably of like deep into a long ride, you just couldn't, you think that another mouthful of sugary sports drink is going to make you vomit, and it probably is, because you're just gumming your stomach up and it's all backing up. And it's in those situations where I think separating and drinking like water with electrolyte capsules, or a hypotonic electrolyte drink plus gels and bars or something, is a better combination. I suppose that's a good segue into gels, because gels effectively, if you no pun intended, boil it down, a energy gel is a carbohydrate drink with a lot of the water taken out. It's a more viscous drink, but you do need to, because it's so concentrated. So the energy gel that we make is about 50 grams, about 50 milliliters in volume. and it contains 30 grams of carbs. The energy drink that we do is 30 grams of carbs in 500 milliliters. So it's about 10 times more concentrated in a gel. That makes it really easy to carry, more portable, and you can obviously get more calories, more bang for your buck. And gels, as most people listening will know, are the most versatile and easily digestible way of getting carbs in for most events. So there's not many events you can't use a gel in. You could use it in an Olympic distance try. You can use multiples of them in an Ironman or an ultra run. And I would say for everything, certainly the athletes that we work with in middle distance triathlon, they would tend to predominantly rely on gels as the main energy source, because it's easy then to dial up your energy intake or down alongside your hydration and salts from your bottles. Where energy gels get a bad name is that some people, if you are only going to intend to eat energy gels for hours and hours and hours on end, some people can do that, but a lot of people find that it just gets a bit sickly and a bit horrid, and so you're not going to do, for instance, the Tour de France exclusively on gels. Most people who ride the Tour are going to eat a lot of gels, but they're also going to eat a lot of bars. They're going to eat some chews. They're going to eat real food as well, because we're humans and we evolved not just to slurp down syrupy carbohydrates. We like to chew on things. The stomach prefers having a bit of a solid mass of food to get hold of sometimes, and so as you kind of move up the scale, you get into energy chews, you get into energy bars, and as I say, in really long stuff, a lot of real foods to then supplement your energy intake. Really, there's no kind of hard and fast right and wrongs with this. As I say, I've known people do entire Ironmans pretty much on energy gels and drinks, and if you can do that, if there's no performance disadvantage to doing that, then it's probably a really good way to go. But if you're like most of us, you might actually prefer to maybe throw a couple of energy bars in on the bike or something like that, just to break it up and give yourself something to look forward to eating wise.
Yeah, brilliant. And the energy bars, as I've heard you reference on one of your YouTube, or Precision Hydrations, I should say, Andy's YouTube clips about the 3 levers of fueling or thereabouts, you mentioned that energy bars have come so far since their founding days in, I think, Cliff Kitchen in the 80s. They've really progressed.
Yeah. You can get lots of different types now, can't you? I mean, I used to use power bars, the original power bars, quite a bit when I was racing, and unashamedly just because I saw Dave Scott was using them. So obviously it was the thing to do. And they were you probably remember those. They were like a thick paste basically, and you could, and they were really hard to chew. Yes. And in the cold, they would take 15 minutes to eat one and stuff. But those luckily those kind of things have moved on a lot. There's lots of different textures and types, and there's a blurred line now between kind of the bars that you can even buy in a supermarket and they're in energy bars. So I always say to people, we work with a young lad, Leon Chevalier, who just came second at the Outdoors triathlon. I think he was top 3 in Ironman Bolton this year as well. He always loves to have a Snickers bar on the bike during the Ironman, because he just says he looks forward to eating it. And we can work out the macros of what's in there, and it's perfectly adequate. You won't want to do the whole thing on Snickers bars, but he wants to have that. So I think with energy bar choice, you can, there's horses for courses. You can basically pick something that you like to eat. And I know that ultra runners eat all sorts of bars and other crazy foods on the go, because the psychological component of enjoying what you're eating becomes really important when you're racing for, let's say 20 hours doing a 100-miler or something.
Yeah, well, Camille Herron's famous beer ingestion in the dying parts of an ultra. Yeah, great example. Brilliant. Andy, pre-race, any advice around carbohydrate fueling pre-race? You touched on the concept of carbohydrate loading, but I'm thinking about the immediate hour before the start of an Ironman, for example, or a marathon.
You're right. Carbohydrate loading is definitely important, and that happens well before the hour before. That's in the last 72 to 48 hours before an event, when you're making sure that you're eating extra carbs to keep your energy levels topped up. But and also I would say on the morning of a really long race, if you're doing like a long ultra or even a marathon or an Ironman or half Ironman, breakfast is also a really important meal. And I know a lot of athletes struggle with breakfast. I was I was always fortunate in that I could seemingly just eat my normal breakfast before a race. But if you can't, it's worth considering getting some kind of digestible carbohydrates in first thing in the morning, whatever you feel like you can tolerate. But then that last hour is an interesting one because different people have different approaches. Some people will like to finish all of their eating well before, an hour before, and then just sip on either a sports drink or water in the last build up because they don't feel like they can do anything else. I often try to encourage athletes to take either an energy gel or a small portion of energy drink in the last 15 or 20 minutes before the start, because it basically takes about 10 or 15 minutes for a gel or a drink to make its way through your digestive tract and into your bloodstream. And if you time it about right, that means you get an extra kind of uplift in blood sugar levels at the start of the race, just when the adrenaline's flowing, when you're going really hard, and when you're going to burn through more energy. So it gives you that extra top up. If athletes have an energy gel in the last 15, 20 minutes before a race, we would count that in their energy intake for the race itself, if that makes sense, when we do the numbers. So you're effectively getting 30 grams of carbs in just ahead of the start, which kind of counts in your race intake. The only caveat to that is that if you either time it a bit wrong, or if you're some people appear to get what's called a hypoglycemic response to this, which means that their blood sugar rises very rapidly, but then drops a lot because of insulin release. That it's kind of contentious in the sports science literature as to whether that matters or not, but I think it's quite individual. I mean, basically, if you feel like you get an energy low a few minutes after taking a gel when you're not exercising, then it's probably not something that you should do before the start of a race. So it's something to try out in training. But for a lot of people, it seems to work because once you start exercising, insulin release is kind of suppressed in the body. So you shouldn't see a big drop. And hopefully what it does, it's just extra fuel to the fire. And actually one tip that I got from some of the cyclists we were working with is that they find that actually taking an energy gel while you're warming up, as opposed to when you're just stood still, seems to also improve that response because the exercise again reduces the insulin response, which would then clear the sugar out of the blood.
That's so interesting. It makes sense though.
I would always advocate people to try that because if it's a long day, the more energy you can get in, the better, really. So if you can make it work, then give it a go.
You go for it. It's common practice. You see it on the start line of any. It seems to be well accepted common practice as well. You're listening to Andy Blow on this expert edition of the Physica Performance Show, episode 290, Knowing Your Carbohydrate Fueling Numbers. If you missed last week's episode of the Physica Performance Show, it was a featured performer episode featuring Australian Olympian Scott Bowden, who competed in the 2016 Olympic Games in both the road and mountain bike cross-country disciplines, and is a young Australian cyclist on the rise. Here's a little snippet of Scott sharing on his career highs, lows, and learn-ins.
For cycling, you'd say you just had a chainless day, like you couldn't feel your chain, like your legs just felt great, like you've got the confidence that no one can ride away from you, no matter if someone attacks, you know that they can't drop you. Maybe they can, but your confidence is that they can't.
To enjoy the full episode, jump back to wherever it is that you enjoy your podcast from. Whilst there, peruse the archives dating all the way back to episode 1, featuring surf lifesaving Ironman champion Ali Day. For now, let's jump back with this week's featured guest, Andy Blow, co-founder of Precision Hydration, sharing on all things knowing your carbohydrate fueling numbers. You speak to any endurance athlete, recreationally competitive or elite, and they'll all tell you something different about their own preferences of solids versus gels versus other sources like you touched on there. Some elite cyclists will say don't take any solids on, others will say start solids late in the race, others will say start them at the start and then wean off them. Yeah, I think it just drives home the point that this is an individual process that you've got to work through in terms of picking your sources as well.
Definitely, and learning to listen to your own body and sort of trust your instincts, try things out. That's why I keep coming back to it, but this whole process is a bit of organised trial and error and making notes and putting things in your training diary around what works for you and what doesn't is important, because you're dead right. I talk to people and they are we're all the same in that it's a kind of human weakness that we are naturally very drawn to what has worked for us, and we're very, because we have first-hand experience, it seems very real, and it's sometimes hard to imagine that the same thing that works for you won't work for someone else, or vice versa. So I listen to what a lot of athletes have to say about their fueling practices, and as you say, there's a lot of divergent opinions. And it doesn't mean that people, some people are right and some people are wrong. There are cases where that does happen, where there's blatantly right and blatantly wrong. But at the same time, I think you have to kind of listen to those things and try as best you can to put yourself in other people's shoes, but also be prepared to stick to your own guns of what works for you. The bottom line is you do have to do what works for you. It requires a level of self-belief and self-confidence to sort of, to figure that out and not have your confidence knocked by other people. And going back to your point earlier, what we see with elite athletes, you would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, by how many athletes kind of have it over time phone me up 2 days before an event and said, I've heard so and so using such and such product, should I be using that on Saturday? And I'm like, whoa, we haven't tried this before. Just because you've heard that one of your competitors is taking this new gel or whatever, this is not the time to throw that into the mix. Yeah. You've just got to have your plan, and it's a real combination of being broad-minded and open-minded, but then also getting the blinkers on when it counts and just doing your thing.
And being disciplined, staying in your lane. Just before my debut Ironman, I had an ex-Tour de France cyclist, very good at Ironman triathlete, say, make sure you eat solids on the bike, which is what I'd been doing in my long training rides. And then I had an Ironman champion suggest not to have any solids at all.
Yeah.
And I thought, right, well, he's got the more recent victories. I'll listen to him. And it's not that doesn't work for him. I realise that now, and I should have realised a week out that I should have stuck to my training plan. But we all make it, and I think we need to be gracious with ourselves when we do make the errors, but stay committed and disciplined to learn from it. Talking about learnings, Andy, what would be your top 3 tips for helping athletes understand their fueling numbers?
It sounds a bit advertorial, but we've built a great tool on the website on precisionhydration.com called the Quick Carb Calculator. And that takes literally 10 seconds to fill out. It asks you what sport you're doing, how long you're going for, how long your event or training session is, and at what intensity. And it will spit out then a very brief recommendation about 30 to 60 to 90 or 90 plus grams of carb per hour, and a little bit of blurb about why to do that. And I would say that is a phenomenal starting point just to get you off on the right foot, because then what you can do is you can take that number, and you can basically run with that in a training session. So that's the first thing, to test it out, see how you feel.
And sorry, Andy, I'm sitting here with my numbers in front of me too. So I've done the test. I can recommend it to everyone. It's simple, as you say. It takes no time at all, and it gives you a good bit of explanation. So that's step 1. Take the test. Use the Quick Carb Calculator. Step 2.
Step 2 is then go out and do a solid session and of that duration, and test out your theory, whatever the numbers spit out. And I would say, depending on if you have an abysmal result, then you're probably going to want to change straight away. But if you have a reasonable or a good result, then try and replicate that at least 1 or 2 more times, so you can see a pattern that actually, this is working. Once you've done that and you've established what works, then is the time to start playing around with, different durations, different intensities, and seeing whether that number needs to go up or down. And again, you can use the Quick Carb Calculator for guidance on that, because that will help point you in the right direction. But by doing that, what you're essentially doing is establishing a working baseline for yourself. And then it will give you huge confidence to know that if you can take a number, you can apply it in training and then repeat it, you can have great confidence in the fact it's likely to work for you on race day. The third one is going to be, especially for those people that are going longer and harder, is being prepared to train your gut over a period of time to adapt to taking a little bit more fuel. Whilst I'm never an advocate for just saying glibly like more is better, a lot of the evidence points towards the fact that the more carbohydrate you can take on comfortably during an event, the higher the output you can sustain and the better recovery you'll get after your effort. So take your kind of baseline number, and then over a period of weeks, if you can then tweak that upwards in terms of grams per hour doing the same sessions or races, then the evidence suggests that that's going to lead to stronger performances overall, either because you'll be able to support a higher level of training and recovery, or on an actual race day, you'll sustain a higher output for longer. So that training the gut piece is kind of a new one, but it's one that I think more athletes need to be aware of.
We'll call that Andy Blow's 3 T's for figuring out your fueling numbers and getting your fueling strategy. Take the quick carb calculator. 2, train, go out and train it, test it.
Yeah.
3, and test it, I should say. And 3, train your gut. So take, test,
Definitely.
train. Andy, every guest of the show issues listeners with a physical challenge. You laid down a great one back on episode 213. What is Andy Blow's physical challenge for the week to listeners going to be?
Well, this is a personal one, because I know like you'll have a lot of triathletes listening. I've been doing a bit of swim run over the last few years, and I've found that a really good training session is to get the biggest hand paddles you've got and get your running shoes on and a big pull buoy, and see how fast you can swim your reps and sets with big hand paddles, a pull buoy, and a pair of running shoes on. It's the most phenomenal strength workout. I mean, I'm not a big guy, but I'm sure my shoulders are pumping up because I'm doing a lot of that at the moment. And it's a good fun training session, but to spice up your training week.
And you get a few looks too. Why has he got I should say, got their shoes on?
Exactly.
Brilliant. Andy, for those that want to follow you, find out more about the precision hydration journey and this fuel range, where can they go?
I think the best place to start is precisionhydration.com. The quick carb calculator we've talked about is on the fueling products pages. It is under a little button that says, tell me how much fuel I need. Our weekly performance newsletter is also really well received, and you can sign up for that on the website in the header and the footer. So yeah, hit that up and get on the newsletter. If anyone wants to book a one-to-one call with our team, that's also still going on. That's free of charge, and you can do that through the website. So you can book a 20-minute Zoom call with a member of the PH crew to talk about hydration and fueling, and we would genuinely love to hear from you.
Yeah, and do that, and do subscribe to the newsletter. I get it and read them amongst a plethora of emails. I do make a point. They're brilliant and informative. Andy, thanks for your contribution to the show ongoing and your support of the show. And all the best for the rest of the year as we all navigate our way back to hopefully some normality.
Yeah, absolutely, Brad. And we're stoked to be working with you, and looking forward to helping you nail this fueling next time you toe the Ironman start line.
So there you have it, another episode of the Physica Performance Show, and I trust and I know you took some learnings from Andy Blow's sharings today. It was great to have Andy back on the show. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Andy featured a year ago, September 2020, on episode 213, which has been one of the most popular expert editions to date. It was a deep dive into all things hydration science, and one that if you missed it, you'll definitely want to go back with your pen and paper and take away a bucket load of learnings from. Now, do be sure to be following Precision Hydration over on social. It's simple, at Precision Hydration. The team are doing a fantastic job, as you heard Andy share, with democratizing the information around fueling from the world's best endurance athletes. I've personally been enjoying the infographics that they've been sharing recently of some of their athletic ambassadors, such as former guests of the show, Emma Pallant and Sam Appleton, whom both shared their recent Collins Cup triathlon fueling strategies via an infographic. So jump over to Precision Hydration on social media. Talking about social media, please keep those podsies coming. That's a screenshot of the episode that you're enjoying at any given moment. Tag the show in at Physical Performance Show and we will re-share those. They are always so much fun to see coming through. And thanks as always to those leaving ratings and reviews over on iTunes. This really does help the show grow, reach more earbuds, and is also a source of great feedback. If you have any feedback for the show you'd like to direct to me, then you can reach me b.beer@pogophysio.com.au. Now, if you would like to further your knowledge around this key topic of fueling the endurance athlete, then on the 23rd of October, we will be hosting our next live stream event featuring UK-based sports dietitian and author Rinny McGregor. Rinny featured back on episode 258 of the show, where she discussed fueling for health and performance, and it has been a super popular expert edition. So we felt it was fitting, given the interest in this topic, to make Rinny the next live stream presenter. Now, tickets are just $49 Australian dollars and are available over at pogophysio.com.au/Rinny McGregor live stream. Now, if you are a patron of the show, then we'll be granting you complimentary access to this live stream event. So be on the lookout in the weeks leading up to the live stream for your access codes. And speaking of Patreon, if you would like to support the production of the show from just $5 per month, then please jump over to Patreon, search the Physical Performance Show, and there you can pledge your support. In return, as you just heard, you receive access to not only all upcoming live stream events, such as Rinny McGregor's, but also our very popular back catalogue of live stream events featuring Dr. Stephen Seiler on all things polarized training and Dr. Shona Hallison, who shared so well around optimizing recovery. A massive thanks, as always, to the great folk who make this show possible each and every week. Darryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin on all things show administration, Matthew Walding on all things show graphic design. This show is not possible without our partners. We are so excited to have Polar on board supporting the show's production. Don't forget, if you're in the market for a world-leading GPS watch or heart rate monitor, you cannot go past Polar's range. You can get 15% off selected products by using the code TPPS at the checkout over at polar.com. Now, coming up on next week's episode, we are calling time for a catch-up episode. More than 20 weeks have passed since our last catch-up episode, and haven't the highs, lows, and learnings been flowing from our guests? So next week, we're going to do a reflective exercise and share with you some of the most popular segments from our recent guests on a catch-up episode. Following that, you are in for a bucket load of treats, including dual Olympic Games triathlon champion Alistair Brownlee. This is a conversation I've been working on and waiting for since 2016, and boy oh boy was it worth it. We've got some great expert editions coming your way as well, so be sure to be tuning in to next week's episode. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.